July 8, 1944, 16:45 hours, near Caen, Normandy, France. The Canadian corporal raised his rifle, then hesitated. The German soldier standing before him wasn't advancing, wasn't fighting. He was just standing there. Hands raised above his head, uniform in tatters, boots held together with wire. His face was gaunt, not battlefield gaunt but something deeper. Starvation gaunt. His eyes held something the corporal had seen before, but never in a German. Absolute, bone-deep terror. Not of being captured. Of being sent back. Canadish? The German asked, voice hoarse. Canadian? The corporal lowered his rifle slightly. Yeah, Canadian. Regina rifles. The German's knees buckled. He didn't faint, he chose to drop, hands still raised, and when he spoke again his voice broke. Nicht Russisch. Nicht Russisch. Bit. Not Russian. Not Russian. Please. The corporal didn't understand the words, but he understood the fear. You're surrendering? Ja. Yes. Surrender. I surrender. The German's hands were shaking so badly he could barely keep them up. You shoot? Or prisoner? Prisoner. We don't shoot POWs. The corporal gestured him forward. Come on. You're safe now. The German looked at him like he'd just promised something impossible. Then he whispered, barely audible, safe. This must be heaven. His name was Kurt Becker. 24 years old. From a village outside Dresden. Before the war he'd been a teacher. Before Stalingrad, he'd been a soldier who still believed in victory. After Stalingrad, he'd been something else entirely. A survivor who knew hell was real because he'd lived in it for 8 months. The collapse at Stalingrad in February 1943 had been total. 90,000 German soldiers captured by the Red Army in a city reduced to rubble and ice. Kurt had been among them, wounded, frostbitten, barely conscious when Soviet soldiers pulled him from a basement where his unit had held out for 3 weeks after the surrender. He remembered the march. Thousands of them walking east through snow that came up to their knees. No food. No shelter. Men dropping every few meters left where they fell. The survivors envied the dead within the first day. The camp had been worse than the march. Barracks without heat in a Siberian winter that reached 40 below zero. Rations that were measured in grams. A slice of black bread, thin soup that was mostly water, sometimes a potato if you were lucky. Work details that lasted 12 hours in the cold, building roads or cutting timber. Guards who shot you if you stopped working. Guards who shot you if you didn't stop working fast enough. 8 months. Kurt watched 200 men in his barracks reduced to 70. Dysentery. Typhus. Starvation. Beatings. Execution for infractions as minor as stealing food or falling asleep on watch. He survived by becoming invisible. By volunteering for nothing. By eating anything, tree bark, leather from boots, rats when he could catch them. Then in October 1943 an opportunity. The Germans needed men. Desperate for bodies to throw at the advancing Red Army. They made an offer to POWs, join auxiliary units, not Wehrmacht but support troops, and earn your way back to German lines. Most prisoners refused, knowing it was suicide. Kurt accepted, knowing staying was slower suicide. He didn't fight against the Red Army. He drove trucks, moved supplies, stayed behind the lines. And when the front collapsed again in spring 1944, he retreated with the German forces west. When the Normandy invasion came and Germany scrambled to reinforce France, his unit was transferred. By July he was outside Caen watching Canadian tanks roll through burning countryside, and he made a decision. He was done. Done fighting. Done running. He would surrender to the first Allied soldier he saw and pray they didn't send him back east. That soldier was Corporal Mitchell from Regina, Saskatchewan, who looked at Kurt like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't have all the pieces to. If this moment, when a man chooses captivity over freedom because captivity meant safety, already changed how you think about survival, stay with us. What Kurt found in Canadian hands will show you the difference between existing and living. The processing station was set up in a requisitioned French farmhouse 2 kilometers behind the front line. Kurt was the 43rd German prisoner processed that day. A lieutenant sat behind a field desk, papers spread out, looking tired but professional. Name. Becker. Corporal. Unit. Kurt hesitated. If he told them about Stalingrad, about the Soviet camp, would they send him back? Would there be some treaty, some exchange? Supply unit. 21st Panzer Division. The lieutenant wrote it down without looking up. You wounded? No. Hungry. Very hungry. That made the lieutenant look up. He really looked at Kurt, At the hollow cheeks, the way his uniform hung like a tent, the tremor in his hands that wasn't from cold. When's the last time you ate? Yesterday. Small bread. Before, 3 days nothing. The lieutenant made a note, then called over his shoulder. Corporal, get this man to the mess. Full ration. Then medical check. He looked back at Kurt. You'll be transported to a holding facility tomorrow. There'll be food there. Regular meals. Medical care if you need it. You understand? Kurt nodded, not quite believing it. You're a prisoner of war. That means you're protected under the Geneva Convention. We follow the rules. You'll be treated fairly. The lieutenant's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was explaining weather. Don't try to escape, don't cause trouble, and you'll be fine. Clear? Clear, Kurt managed. A private led him to a tent where other German prisoners sat on benches, eating from metal trays. The smell hit Kurt first. Real food, cooked food, food that wasn't moldy or frozen. His stomach cramped with anticipation and disbelief. The private handed him a tray. Stew. Bread. A cup of tea. The bread was white, not the dense black brick from the Soviet camp. The stew had meat in it, actual meat, not just the memory of meat. Kurt sat down and stared at the tray. You gonna eat that or just look at it? Another German asked. Older, maybe 40, with a Bavaria accent. It's real? The Bavarian laughed without humor. Welcome to Western captivity, friend. They feed you here. It's bizarre, I know, but it's real. Kurt picked up the spoon with shaking hands and took a bite. The stew was warm. The meat was tender. Tasted like heaven. He started crying and couldn't stop, even as he kept eating, even as the other prisoners looked away to give him privacy in his breakdown. I ate until I was sick. Then I ate more. I couldn't believe it was real. I kept waiting for someone to take it away, to tell me it was a mistake, that prisoners don't get to eat like this. No one did. They just let me eat. The transport to the main holding facility came the next morning. 30 German prisoners loaded onto a truck with Canadian guards. Not crammed in like cattle, seated, with space, with dignity. The truck had a canvas cover to keep out the rain. The guards didn't hit anyone. Didn't scream. Just loaded them up and told them to stay seated. The drive took 3 hours through the Norman countryside. Kurt watched through the canvas flap as they passed destroyed villages and advancing Allied columns. They stopped once at a checkpoint. A Canadian officer counted the prisoners, checked paperwork, waved them through. At one point, the truck slowed behind a convoy. The guard nearest Kurt, young, maybe 20, pulled out a cigarette and lit it. After a moment, he offered the pack to Kurt. Kurt stared at it. In the Soviet camp, cigarettes were currency. A cigarette could buy you an extra ration, a warmer spot to sleep, protection from the camp bullies. Guards didn't share cigarettes with prisoners. Guards barely acknowledged prisoners were human. Go ahead, the guard said. Long trip. Kurt took one with trembling fingers. The guard lit it for him. They smoked in silence while the convoy crept forward. 2 men who'd been trying to kill each other yesterday, now just 2 men sharing tobacco. The holding facility was a converted French military barracks outside Bayeux. Concrete buildings, barbed wire, watchtowers. But even from the outside, Kurt could see it was different. Clean. Organized. No bodies. No smell of death and disease. Just a camp. A real POW camp, like the ones in the Geneva Convention his instructors had told him about before the war, back when rules still mattered. Processing took an hour. Photograph, he stood against a wall looking like a skeleton in uniform. Fingerprints. Medical examination. The doctor was Canadian, spoke some German, examined him with professional detachment. Severe malnutrition. Possible frostbite damage to your feet. Scarring on your back. What's this from? Kurt didn't answer. The doctor didn't press. You'll be assigned to a recovery barracks. Extra rations until you gain weight. No work details for 2 weeks. After that, we'll reassess. The doctor wrote notes, then looked up. You're going to be fine. You'll recover here. Kurt wanted to believe him. Desperately wanted to believe him. The barracks held 40 men. Bunk beds with actual mattresses, thin but real. A wood stove that was lit every evening. Windows with glass. A latrine that was cleaned daily. It was luxury beyond imagination for Kurt, but routine for the other prisoners who'd been captured in France or North Africa and never known anything else. His bunkmate was a corporal named Franz, captured at Falaise 3 weeks earlier. Franz had been in the Wehrmacht since 1940, fought in Poland and France and Russia, and he couldn't understand Kurt's reaction to the camp. It's just a POW camp, Franz said that first night. It's boring. The food's adequate but bland. The Canadians are polite but distant. It's just existing, It's heaven, Kurt said quietly. You're joking. No. Kurt lay on his mattress, and felt the blanket covering him. Oh, clean, warm. This is heaven. Franz studied him in the dim light from the single bulb. Where were you before France? East. Russia. Yes. Franz was quiet for a long moment. Then, you were a prisoner there. 8 months. Stalingrad. Kurt closed his eyes. Then auxiliary unit. Then here. Skies. Franz breathed. Shit. I heard stories. Never knew if they were true. They're true. Kurt pulled the blanket tighter. All true. This place, these Canadians, they're not like the Russians. They follow rules. They treat us like we're still human. They're just following the Geneva Convention. The Russians didn't. Kurt's voice was flat. They didn't follow anything except cruelty. Men died every day. From hunger, from cold, from beatings. The guards shot people for sport. For fun. For no reason at all. He opened his eyes, looking at the ceiling. Here they give us mattresses. They give us food. They have doctors who actually treat our wounds. They don't beat us. Franz, they don't beat us. Do you understand how remarkable that is? Franz didn't answer. What could he say? The system that governed Canadian POW camps was built on principles that seemed almost naive in their optimism. Prisoners were still soldiers, still human, still entitled to basic dignity. The policy came from Ottawa, filtered down through military command, and executed by camp administrators who understood that brutality was easy, but discipline was hard. Security. Keeping prisoners contained, yes, but also keeping them healthy enough that they didn't cause problems. Starving, desperate men fought back. Well-fed men followed rules. Diplomacy. Canada held German POWs. Germany held Canadian POWs. The treatment of one directly affected the treatment of the other. Every meal served, every medical check, every letter home sent a message. We honor our commitments. Do the same. Morality. The men running these camps had fought in the trenches of the Great War. They'd seen what happened when civilization collapsed. They'd sworn quietly that it wouldn't happen again. Not on their watch. Not in their camps. It wasn't kindness. It was policy. But to men like Kurt, who'd survived hell, policy that protected them felt like grace. The daily routine began at 0600. Roll call. Breakfast, porridge, bread, coffee or tea. Work details for those cleared by medical. Nothing military per Geneva Convention. Gardening. Kitchen duty. Maintenance. Lunch at noon. More work. Dinner at 1800. Evening free time. Lights out at 2200. It was monotonous. Predictable. Boring. For Franz, it was tedious captivity. For Kurt, it was salvation. He gained weight slowly. The extra rations helped. Double portions for the first month until the doctor cleared him to regular meals. His hands stopped shaking after 3 weeks. The nightmares continued, but less frequently. He volunteered for kitchen duty and was accepted, working alongside other prisoners to prepare meals for 2,000 Germans. The Canadian guards were professional. Distant but not cruel. They didn't fraternize, but they didn't harass either. They enforced rules. No fighting, no escape attempts, lights out at designated hours, but they enforced them fairly. A prisoner who broke rules faced consequences. Reduced privileges, isolation, extra duty. But not beatings. Never beatings. It took Kurt 2 months to stop flinching when a guard approached. 3 months to believe that mealtimes would happen consistently. 4 months to accept that this wasn't temporary, that the Canadians wouldn't suddenly decide to ship all the prisoners east to Soviet revenge. Schmidt was a sergeant, captured in Italy in 1943. He'd been in Canadian custody for 18 months and considered himself an expert on their system. He took an interest in Kurt, partly curiosity, partly compassion for someone obviously damaged. You have to let it go, Schmidt told him one evening in November. They were sitting in the barracks common area, playing cards with worn decks provided by the Red Cross. Whatever happened to you before, it's over. You're here now. This is your reality. I know, Kurt said, studying his hand. Do you? Because you still look at the guards like they might shoot you. Schmidt discarded. They won't. They follow their rules. It's boring how predictable they are. Boring is good, Kurt said quietly. Boring is boring. But Schmidt smiled slightly. Though I suppose it beats the alternative. Another prisoner joined them, Ludwig, a former tank commander with an Iron Cross and a practical worldview. You know what I realized? Ludwig said, dealing himself in. The Canadians don't want us to suffer. They don't want us to enjoy ourselves either. They want us to just exist. Safely. Orderly. Until the war ends and they can send us home. That's it, Schmidt agreed. We're a logistical problem. And the Canadian solution is to make us as little trouble as possible by treating us adequately. Is that so wrong? Kurt asked. Ludwig shrugged. It's honest. I respect it more than if they pretended to care about us personally. They don't. We're enemy soldiers. But they have rules and they follow them, and that's enough. They weren't kind. They weren't friends. But they were fair. And after 8 months in hell, fairness felt like love. The letter writing was supervised but allowed. Once a month, prisoners could send a short letter home through the Red Cross. They were censored, no military information, no complaints about treatment, but they got through. Eventually, Kurt wrote his first letter in August, 3 months after arriving. His hand shook so badly he had to rewrite it twice. Liebe Mutter. I am alive. I am a prisoner in Canada, but I am safe. I am fed. I'm not hurt. The camp follows international rules. I am treated fairly. I cannot tell you everything, but I want you to know I survived. I will come home when the war ends. However long that takes, I will survive. Tell Father I am well. Tell him I have learned things about endurance he would understand. Tell him the hardest lessons come from seeing the difference between cruelty and discipline. I love you. I will see you again. Kurt. He handed it to the censor, a Canadian lieutenant who read German fluently. The officer skimmed it, nodded, stamped it, and placed it in the outgoing mail pile. No comment. No mockery. Just procedure. The letter took 4 months to reach Dresden through Red Cross channels. His mother received it in December 1944. She kept it for the rest of her life. Christmas 1944 arrived with snow and a strange sense of displacement. The war was still raging, Germany collapsing, everyone knew it, but in the Canadian camp outside Bayeux, there was an odd stillness. The guards permitted religious services. Catholic and Protestant chaplains, some German prisoners, some Canadian military clergy, conducted masses in the mess hall. Kurt attended the Protestant service. He wasn't particularly religious, but the ritual mattered. The hymns sung in German, the chaplain's words about peace and endurance, the simple act of gathering without fear. After the service, the Canadians distributed Red Cross packages, cigarettes, chocolate, tins of meat, small luxuries that made captivity less miserable. It wasn't celebration. It was acknowledgement. Christmas existed even here. Kurt sat in the barracks that evening with his bunkmates, sharing the chocolate from his package. Franz had received a letter from home. His wife and children were safe in Bavaria, far from the bombing. Schmidt had received nothing but shared his cigarettes anyway. Ludwig told stories about Christmases before the war when the world made sense. What will you do? Franz asked Kurt. After the war. When we go home. Teach again, Kurt said. If there are still schools. If there's still a country to teach in. There will be, Schmidt said, though no one quite believed him. And if there isn't, Kurt said quietly, I'll remember that there are places in the world where people follow rules even when it's inconvenient. Where discipline means restraint, not cruelty. Where prisoners get mattresses and meals and dignity. He looked at his chocolate, turning it over in his fingers. I'll remember that civilization survived even when we tried to destroy it. The barracks fell silent. Outside, snow drifted against the windows. The wood stove crackled. Somewhere in the distance, a guard called out routine patrol checks. They were prisoners. They were defeated. They were far from home. But they were alive. And they were learning what it meant to be treated as human beings again, one boring, predictable, miraculous day at a time. If you're beginning to understand that survival isn't just about staying alive, but about rediscovering your humanity, subscribe. Because the final chapter of this story shows what happens when prisoners become people again. The end of the war came in stages. Germany's surrender in May 1945. The slow realization that it was truly over. The waiting. The uncertainty. The Canadian camps didn't empty immediately. Repatriation was a massive logistical operation. Millions of displaced persons, destroyed infrastructure, a Germany divided and occupied. The prisoners waited. Months became a year. A year became 2. Kurt remained in the camp until July 1947. 26 months after the war ended. It wasn't punishment, it was simply logistics. Prisoners were repatriated in waves, prioritized by various factors. Kurt's time in Soviet custody, documented in his file, actually delayed his return. The Allies wanted to verify his story, ensure he wasn't a war criminal hiding behind a convenient excuse. Eventually they cleared him. A teacher from Dresden who'd survived Stalingrad, escaped and surrendered to Canadians. Not a hero. Not a villain. Just a man who'd made choices to survive. The day he left, Schmidt walked with him to the transport truck. They'd been bunkmates for 3 years. "You'll be all right?" Schmidt asked. "I don't know," Kurt said honestly. "Germany's destroyed. My city's probably rubble. I don't know if my family survived the bombing. But you'll be all right." Kurt looked back at the camp, the barracks, the wire, the watchtowers. His prison for 3 years. His salvation for 3 years. "I learned something here. Something the Russians never taught me. I learned that there are still people who believe rules matter. That even enemies deserve basic dignity. That civilization is a choice we make every day even when it costs us. The Canadians just followed their regulations." "Yes. And that's everything." Kurt picked up his small bag, his few possessions, letters from home, a Red Cross blanket he'd been allowed to keep. "The regulations protected us. Protected our humanity when we couldn't protect it ourselves. I'll remember that." They shook hands. No sentimentality. Just respect between two men who'd survived together. The truck drove him to a processing center. Then a train across France. Then into Germany. Then home. Dresden was rubble. 70% of the city destroyed by Allied bombing in February 1945. His family's apartment building was gone. But his parents had survived. They'd fled to the countryside. He found them through Red Cross registries. Reunited in a refugee camp outside Leipzig. His mother held him for 5 minutes without speaking. His father asked only one question: "How did you survive?" "Luck," Kurt said. "And strangers who followed rules when they didn't have to." Kurt Becker taught again. First in makeshift schools and refugee camps. Then in the new East Germany, though he avoided politics carefully. Then, after 1961, he emigrated to West Germany and taught there until retirement. He never spoke publicly about his war service. Never wrote memoirs. Never joined veteran organizations. But in 1983 he did one thing. He wrote a letter to the Canadian Veterans Affairs Office. It took him 3 drafts. "To whom it may concern. In July 1944, I surrendered to Canadian forces near Cannes. I was processed, held as a prisoner of war, and treated according to the Geneva Convention. I spent 3 years in Canadian custody before repatriation in 1947. I'm writing to say thank you. Not for kindness, you were not kind. Not for friendship, you were not friends. But for discipline. For following your rules even when it would have been easier not to. For treating prisoners as human beings deserving of basic dignity. I survived a Soviet POW camp. I know what captivity without rules looks like. I know what happens when cruelty becomes policy. Your camps were the opposite. Boring, predictable, humane. I'm an old man now. I will not live much longer. But I wanted you to know that your restraint, your discipline, your insistence on civilization even in war, it mattered. It saved more than just my life. It saved my ability to believe that humanity can survive its worst impulses. Thank you for being boring. Thank you for being predictable. Thank you for being human when you had every reason not to be." Kurt Becker, Dresden/Munich. The letter was filed in archives. No one responded. It wasn't that kind of letter. But it exists. A small piece of evidence that civilization, when it holds, leaves marks deeper than victory or defeat. The story of German prisoners in Canadian camps is often overshadowed by stories of liberation, of battles won, of evil defeated. But for 37,000 German prisoners who spent years in Canadian custody, it's a different story. A story of rules followed when breaking them would have been satisfying. Of discipline maintained when revenge would have been understandable. Of basic human dignity extended to enemies because that's what the rules required. Not all prisoners had Kurt's experience of contrasts. Most had only known Western captivity, adequate, boring, procedurally humane. They complained about the food, the monotony, the distance from home. They didn't know how fortunate they were. Kurt knew. Every meal. Every mattress. Every day a guard walked past without hitting him. Every night he slept without wondering if he'd wake up. He knew. They expected gratitude. I couldn't give them that. Gratitude requires emotion and I was too numb. What I gave them instead was respect. Deep, enduring respect for people who chose civilization when barbarism would have been easier. Who followed their own rules even when their enemy had broken every rule in existence. If this story showed you that the real measure of a nation isn't how it treats its citizens, but how it treats its prisoners, share it. Because Kurt's story is about more than survival. It's about the difference between existing and living. Between enduring and healing. Between the hell of abandoning rules and the heaven of choosing to keep them. Today there are no more prisoners from that war. Kurt Becker died in 1998, 78 years old, in Munich. He's buried in a small cemetery in Bavaria. His gravestone is simple, name, dates, nothing more. But in a file in Ottawa his letter remains. And in the records of Canadian Veterans Affairs, there's a notation that 37,000 German prisoners were held in Canadian camps during World War II. That 36,900 survived and were repatriated. That the mortality rate in Canadian camps was less than 1%, compared to 50% in Soviet camps. Numbers, statistics, cold facts. But behind those numbers were men like Kurt. Men who learned that hell was real, and that heaven wasn't a place you went after death. Heaven was a place where someone gave you a mattress, a meal, and the promise that tomorrow would be exactly as boring as today. Heaven was predictability, routine, rules followed, discipline maintained, civilization choosing itself, every day even when it cost effort. The war taught Kurt to fear. The Soviet camp taught him to endure. The Canadian camp taught him something more precious, that even in humanity's darkest hour, some people still choose restraint over revenge. Still choose rules over rage. Still choose civilization over chaos. I escaped hell and found heaven in a prisoner of war camp. Not because it was paradise, but because after months of cruelty, predictable decency felt like grace. The Canadians didn't save me with kindness. They saved me with regulations. And that is the greatest lesson war ever taught me. He survived hell by escaping. He survived heaven by staying. Only one taught him to be human again.